Hello and welcome. My name is Val and I run the Journey Further book club. Thank you so much for tuning in. For those who don't know, Journey Further book club is a community of over 5,000 CEOs, founders, and overall ambitious marketers on a mission to learn and grow. We read the latest and greatest business, marketing, and nonfiction books and share the very best insight with our members. We host community discussions and exclusive author events. The book club is an offshoot of performance brand agency Journey Further, whose Vice President of Organic Media, Beth Nunnington, is here today in conversation with the brilliant Tara Mohr, expert on women's leadership and well-being, and author of Playing Big, the practical guide to amplifying women's voices. Beth and Tara, over to you.
Thank you so much, Val, and hello, Tara. It is brilliant to be chatting to you today. I am really excited. I actually read Playing Big in lockdown, which was a difficult time for everyone. And I think every single chapter really resonated with me and I found it so helpful. So I'm super, super excited to be chatting to you.
And I'm honored by that. Thank you for sharing the book in that way. And I'm so glad it resonated with you, especially during that difficult time. So I'm happy to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again for joining us. So I wanted to kick off with the title of your book is Playing Big, and it's been designed to stop women from playing small. So my first question is to ask, what do you mean by playing big, and how does that differ from playing small?
Yeah, that's a great place to begin. So, for me, doing this work in one way began in about 2009. I had just started a very small coaching practice. I was getting my coaching training and working with those first few clients that you're sort of required to work with as a student. So, I was a total newbie. And I didn't know what the focus of my coaching work would be. I didn't even really know that I was going to be doing coaching work. I was just sort of interested in doing something more in the arena of personal growth and our inner lives. At the time, I was working in a totally different career. And right away, within the first few weeks of working with clients, I felt like I was seeing this very pronounced and upsetting pattern with the clients that were coming. And the pattern was basically that every single one of the clients I would come to feel within like 30, 40 minutes was just this amazing woman. And you sort of get to talk to people in a different way when you're in a coaching session. It's different than a friend chat. You're really hearing like, what are their dreams? What are their thoughts about their industry, their company? What do they think needs to change in the world? Um, what what are their aspirations? And so I was just hearing that from these women and so inspired by them. And basically every single one, I was like, I'm ready to vote for you for president or prime minister or whatever. Like you've got, you're brilliant, you're conscientious, you're caring, you're hardworking. And yet what I was hearing from those women was also this sense of, yeah, but I'm probably not ready yet to take on that bigger role. Or if that thing that I just said, if that was a good idea, wouldn't someone have done it already or thought of it already? Or, sure, I could do that in 5 years in my career, but I'm surely not qualified enough now. And thoughts were just obviously untrue. Like I could really see that sitting across from them. And then I realized, like, yeah, this is not just showing up here in the coaching office. I see this with my fabulous women friends. I see this in myself. And it really pained me. And so that sense of what playing small means kind of comes from those early experiences. It's the behavior that results when we don't see ourselves as ready for or qualified for going for what are really our authentic dreams in our life. Um, and and so the definition of playing big that I came to really reflecting on my own kind of what playing small felt like and was in my own life, the definition of playing big that I arrived at is playing big is being more loyal to your dreams than to your fears. And I find a lot of women have been so frustrated with the career advice out there because it often assumes that their goal is to just climb the corporate ladder as quickly and as aggressively as they can. And so people really kind of can breathe an exhalation of relief that playing big is whatever, it's being loyal to your dreams. And if that's working, but having enough time to, pursue ceramics on the side, great. If that's starting your own company, great. If that's climbing the ladder as fast as you can, great. Like, I really believe we're each um, given really sacred longings for what is going to be our path of self actualization in the world. So it's about listening to those and siding with those instead of our fears.
I love that. Thank you, Tara. I think it's important to make that clarification that playing big doesn't have to mean becoming the CEO of a company. It's whatever's personal to you, which is what I really loved about the book, because I think it's really useful for anyone in any field, and whether they're working or not. Um, so in the early stages of the book, and one of my favorite parts, we examine the difference between your inner critic and your inner mentor. And could you just elaborate on why you think it's so important to get to know those inner personas a bit better, and also how you can do that?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So the inner critic voice is that voice in us that speaks to us in a harsh or unsupportive way. It's the voice that chatters at us in a way that we would probably never talk to a friend, right? So, my inner critic might be really speaking up if I look in the mirror and I don't like the way my arms look, or maybe sometimes when I'm doing a corporate event, there's a little voice in my head that says, everything you're doing is too like woo woo and fluffy, and it's not going to be research backed enough for this group, gets really mean. And we all have this voice. And sometimes, I'll do, when we have my courses, we'll have like 200 people, on a Zoom call. And I just ask everyone to share some of the things that their inner critic says. And the chat is just this stream of really mean thoughts that every person can put in the chat what their inner critic says. And people sometimes cry just reading the chat when you understand the multiplying effect, right? Of like all of these lovely human beings with so much to give the world walking around um, not even battling it. I mean, most of us aren't even battling it. We're just living with it barely consciously. But like, how do we even get anything done, really, when you think about it? So that's the inner critic voice. And in the playing big approach in our model, we don't talk about that as a lack of confidence. Or I think in the UK, I often hear people use the term self-belief. You need to have self-belief or a lack of self-belief. I don't like to talk about it that way, because that's almost like taking it on, it's making the inner critic one with you, to say, I don't have the self-belief, I need to cultivate this quality, I need to find a way to believe in myself. And I find it's much more useful for people to actually start thinking of that voice as a voice within that's not the core of us. Just one strand of thought. And sometimes I even think of it as like just like a little pea-sized spot, in my brain, because it just helps me bring it into proportion.
Mhm.
So it's just one voice. And then if it's a voice that we're actually, it's not the core of us, it's kind of a like an intruder in our best thinking and the way we want to relate to ourselves, then we can start to listen to that voice and observe it and relate to it with choice, not just enmeshing our whole self with it. So that's a lot of the work when you get into the Playing Big book or the course, to really start thinking of your inner critic as a voice, naming it. Oh, I'm hearing from my inner critic right now. And then we talk about that often the inner critic comes up because there's something in the situation that's out of our comfort zone, and that puts us at an emotional risk of failure or rejection, or um, we think, maybe being stigmatized or standing out too much. And so there's a part of us that's just going to say any mean thing to ourselves, no matter how untrue, to try and get us to go from that playing bigger step to instead to retreat back into our comfort zone. So I just can't say enough, like, how important it is to have tools to relate to the voice of self-doubt. I think everyone should be being taught it in school. It's like, I know when I went to high school, they actually taught us in high school how to balance a checkbook. And, it was like that was seen as a practical life skill. And like, this is right there with it. Like, everybody needs a way, a sort of self-doubt 101 and a toolkit for how you relate to it. Because it doesn't go away. And, there's research that shows for corporate women, when they assess confidence levels in junior entry level corporate women and senior corporate women, there's very little difference between the confidence levels. And yet we often think this is going to go away when I get more experience, when I have more. No way. It's just that the self-doubt comes up about whatever the edge is then. So it's a lifelong use of those tools. And we're not trying to become confident. We're trying to have a wiser, more effective relationship with our self-doubt, which is really different.
Yeah, that really resonates. As someone who is now one of the most senior women in the business, I still suffer from my inner critic at times, and it's something that I've, had to deal with consistently throughout my career. So I completely agree. I think, unfortunately, it doesn't leave you, and it's about how you manage it. And after reading your book, I know you're about to chat through the inner mentor. That is something that I found really beneficial. And now I do very much visualize my inner mentor. So when I am listening to my self doubt and my inner critic, I try and switch my mindset to what would my inner mentor say, and that has been really helpful to
So
me. So I have to
fantastic.
thank you for that.
Yay, that's so great to hear. And I'm so glad you're sharing it too, because I find, especially when we go into companies, when senior women do share about their inner critic, it's like it makes such a big impact. It opens the space for everyone to be a little more honest and real. And it's so encouraging for people who are looking up and thinking, surely she doesn't feel the way that I feel. Enough with inner critic. Let's get to the good stuff with inner mentor. Um, so, so inner mentor is a voice, uh, for a lot of us, I find we're not we're not on to our inner critic, but once I start talking about it, everyone's like, oh yeah, I know that voice. Inner mentor is not like that, right? For a lot of us, it's like, no one ever talked to me about this part of me. And the inner mentor is like your voice of inner wisdom, that it's often hard for people to believe, but I can just say now, like, I've seen it thousands upon thousands of times, that when you give people the right tools, it turns out everyone can access inside of themselves a voice of calm and wisdom, that's also a very loving and gentle voice. So in inner mentor work, and Beth, you can share more about this experience for you if you want. We do like a guided meditation, that anyone can access. We have it; it's up on the website if you want to just do the audio of it, to meet an older, wiser version of yourself way out into the future, like decades out. And it's really important to note, like, by doing that in a guided meditation, it's not just how you think you'd be in 20 years. If I just said to you, okay, the person you think you'd be in 20 years, she's going to be your inner mentor, that would not accomplish the task at all. It's really about letting go, getting into the space of visualization, really relaxing so that your mind can bring you something quite surprising that is really not what your conscious everyday thinking would have come up with for that inner mentor figure. And that is what tends to happen for people, is that, something that is, at least in some ways, surprising shows up. So you get to meet that older, wiser you. And then you can actually relate to that figure like a mentor. And so, just as Beth, you were saying, like, what would she say in this situation? What would she do? How would she write this email? Like, down to the nitty gritty. How would she approach this difficult conversation? How would she deal with this colleague I'm having trouble with? What would she do with these feelings of fear and intimidation before giving a presentation? And just as you're saying, Beth, like, the answers show up when we ask that question or we picture her doing it, and it can really give us a different path forward. There's a quote that's quite famous in the US. I don't know if it's famous where you are. from Marion Wright Edelman that's you can't be what you can't see. Is that, yeah. And so it's often used a lot to talk about the importance of role models and representation. And I'm all for that. And I also feel like everyone has to be what they never saw because everyone has a unique path. And so going to, an external mentor or looking to someone else's path for the way is not going to give any of us our meant to be life. Our meant to be life is unique.
Yeah, I love that because I know you mentioned in the book as well about really like learning to trust your own instincts, and a part
Yes,
of finding your inner mentor is to do with that, isn't it?
for sure. For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I wanted to touch on another key part of the book that really resonated as well, and I think will be really useful to our team. And that was a different way of looking at fear. And you talk about, well, actually, I read a blog on your website about you appearing in the Today Show and how you felt on the run up to that. And you felt nervous, you were worried about having an outfit
Oh,
disaster.
yes, yes.
And I very much I've spoken a lot on stage. A lot of women in the business, a lot of people in the business have done conferences, and we have to do things that are outside our comfort zone sometimes. So in the book, you talk about two concepts. I'm hoping that I pronounce it right. So it's Pashad and also Yura.
Yeah.
Um,
Very
when
good.
feeling
Good.
afraid.
Yeah. No one can, I mean, there's no reason you should be able to guess the pronunciation. It's pahad and yira. They're two different ancient Hebrew terms for fear. And these are used in the Old Testament. And pahad is the fear of projected or imagined things. Right? Isn't it great to have a word for that? The fear of projected or imagined things. So when we imagine the worst case scenario of what could happen, or when I kind of think it's projecting the movie of how the wardrobe malfunction could happen, how you're going to be laughed out of the room if you share that idea, how if you submit your resume for the thing, they're going to think you're being ridiculous, right? That whole imagined thing, that is pachad, fear. And in our contemporary understanding, we know a lot more about kind of the physiology of that fear, that it often comes from the lizard brain, the reptilian, oldest part of the human brain, which of course it's wired to have us be very overreactive when we sense danger, because our danger sensing system is meant to help us survive. And if I am out in the wild looking for possible predators or poisons or threats, what's going to be my best bet at surviving is not just having a fight or flight response that's going to help me flee or overcome that fear. If it's, just a likely threat, I'm going to survive a lot better if that response fires anytime it's a possible, even a remotely possible threat. So we're sort of wired for this, in a way, catastrophizing and overreactivity. So our pahad fear, unfortunately, as everybody knows, right, it doesn't just fire now in 2023 because you saw a predator, meaning like a bear, while you were walking down the street. What kind of is a little bit the predicament, I think, of being a 21st century human is that when we sense an emotional danger, we have a physiologic response that was designed to help us overcome physical dangers. So anyone who's ever been in a meeting and found their palms were sweating and their heart rate went up and they suddenly couldn't think as clearly and remember what they wanted to say, or their words felt all jumbled, that's exactly what was happening to you. You sensed you were having an emotional fear. Maybe something in the meeting felt scary. There was conflict. You had to speak up. Your body thought, I'm supposed to go into fight or flight because there's a danger. I need to help her sprint fast. I need to get the adrenaline pumping. When we go into fight or flight, our higher level cognition shuts down because our body is trying to conserve resources for the fighting or the fleeing. So now you can't really remember what you had to say or think clearly, right? So we have this kind of crossing of the wires. And that's just one of the ways. There are many that when we're in that pahad type fear, the fear tends to really, really mislead us. So when you notice you're having that, you want to go, oh, yeah, this is a pahad moment. I want to shift out of the fear. Then there's this other type of fear that we really don't have any great word for in the English language, and we certainly don't have it as part of our conversation. And that word is yirah. And Rabbi Liu talks about there's 3 different meanings of yirah. There's 3 different kinds of instances where this term is used in Old Testament stories. So it's the feeling that comes over us when we are inhabiting a larger space than we're used to. It's the feeling we feel when we suddenly are infused with more energy than we normally have. And it's also the feeling we feel in the presence of the sacred. So when Moses is standing at the burning bush, this is the word that's used to describe how he feels. When you're somehow stepping into a larger space, could be a bigger team, a bigger audience, bigger reach for your work. When you're doing something that infuses you with energy, meaning, when you're being authentic, when you're pursuing a passion, when you're doing something that lights you up, or when you're having an experience that's sacred to you, which can include pursuing a passion, telling your truth, saying something difficult that is important to say. Yirah is uncomfortable, right? It's like that. It's almost a feeling. It can be a feeling of like sort of heady, dizzy, weightless, thrill, joy, fear. And it's really, I think, important to have a term for it and a way of being in relationship to it, because in our life, we don't want to miss those yirah moments. There's a lot of good stuff for us there. But what can happen is we just kind of feel the discomfort and the fear edge of it and kind of retract away or avoid those moments or numb out by distracting ourselves or not being present for them. And we don't want to miss out on all that. And our playing big involves a lot of yirah moments.
Something that again stood out and I think would be useful is the communicating with power messaging. So working in marketing, it's really important that we communicate with clarity both internally and
Mm.
externally. So I just wondered if you had any advice on how women, well, everyone in the business can make subtle changes to their language in order for them to play bigger, and also
Yeah.
why is language so important? Why is it
Yeah.
so powerful?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think what happens for a lot of women is that um, we're sort of conditioned in the idea that being kind and being nice and being sort of relationally oriented also means not being direct. It means, not you having kind of good boundaries personally, and that certainly translates into the professional realm. It means apologizing for our voices and our ideas. And it's interesting because you think about, especially with client work, it can be really easy to fall into like that to please the client. We have to kind of always do exactly what the client wants, or um, be really apologetic or tentative with anything that they don't seem on board with, which in a way probably doesn't serve the client actually the best in the long run, because they also need the leadership and the expertise and the kind of stability, right, that comes from someone trusting their position. So the kinds of speech habits that end up happening for a lot of women in kind of this real double bind of, I somehow have to get my work done, I somehow have to get my point across, but I also have to be the good girl and the nice girl all the way. We end up, I'm, sorry to ask this, but I have a question, right? Or here's some, I'm about to say something really important. I just need a little bit of your time to say this really important thing. Or, I'm not no expert on this, but blah, 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 blah. And we use all of these hedges and what linguists call hedges that kind of make what we're saying more tentative and self-deprecating kinds of comments to navigate that double bind of how do I be likable and competent at the same time. And research does show that, women in many corporate arenas really do face that double bind of people tend to perceive them as either competent or likable, but not always both. So we're trying to navigate that, and we navigate it in ways that ultimately don't serve us. What I really encourage people to do as an antidote to that is bring a lot of warmth forward in your communication, make that the way you be likable instead of the apologetic, self-deprecating thing, right? So like do it in a positive way. We're sizing each other up in terms of likability and connection. That's the first thing we size up. Doesn't matter how businessy the business meeting is. What we're deciding in the first minute of a conversation is like, can I trust this person? Do I like them? It's sort of that, it's an old instinctual question of, are they friend or foe? So in the beginning of an interaction, a meeting, a negotiation, it really makes sense to focus on warmth, connection, likability, whether it's you talk about the sports or you talk about the pets or you just, that person had a sick family member over the weekend, you're going to talk to them and find out a little more about that and, show that you care. Like do that first. And then that can give us a little more freedom too in sort of the body of a conversation in the center to really just focus on the content and not have to be tentative about showing our competence. And then I say, kind of why not? It's not really in the research, but like, why not bookend it, end with warmth and with warmth too. I also just want to say, that we've been using the term women so much. And I know there may be people listening who identify as non-binary or as a different gender. And I just want to say that what we hear is that just for anyone who's felt their voice has not often been heard or centered, these tools can be so helpful. And, just that we really welcome anyone who wants to be part of this conversation to be part of it. And I know sometimes using the term women so much can feel non-inclusive in that way. And so I just want to make sure that that's said.
Just quickly, something else was the concept around unhooking from praise
Yes.
and criticism. And again, at Journey Further, we very much have a mantra which is challenge with care, which is giving very open and
Mhm.
direct feedback, but also making sure that we're giving recognition as well. So I wanted to ask you, why is it so important that we recognize when we are becoming hooked on praise and criticism, and what are the signs to look out for?
So first of all, we know, in general, girls are outperforming boys in school in terms of grades. They're also seeking more years of education, graduate level, higher education than boys. And we usually just really celebrate that, not in terms of, there's some concern now about how the boys are doing academically, but that wow, girls and women are coming so far in education. The problem is, right, and I say this as a veteran good student, like what are we really learning behaviorally in school while we're learning all that information and we're sharpening our critical thinking skills? I know I learned very early on, like, you find out what the teacher wants and that's what you give, even down to the very mundane early, right? This one likes to have your name on this side of the page. This one likes to narrate your name on this side of the page. This one thinks a 5-page essay sounds like this. Oh, turns out then, you write that same 5-page essay for someone else, it doesn't get the same grade. So you really learn a certain kind of people pleasing of authority figures and you learn to read the cues. So yeah, we do well in that. Everybody celebrates it. Then we take the same approach into our careers. Now I'll please my boss, and then that we do pretty decently by that too. But then, right, as I'm sure you found, Beth, you get to a point where your job is not really about adapting to each new authority figure. You need to like influence the authority figure. There's a time when a senior person hires you not to really just follow all their instructions, but like impact their ideas, change what they're thinking, contribute something no one else on the team is contributing. Or there just comes a time in your career, maybe you want to go out on your own and start your own business. Maybe you want to innovate and start something entrepreneurial within the company. And like all those good girl skills that got you there don't get you to the next place. So we have to unlearn a lot of those good student habits.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really in terms of feeling like a people pleaser. And then getting, as I have progressed in my career, it then, I'm encouraged to challenge, I'm encouraged to implement new thinking. And at first, like, I did struggle with that. and because I didn't feel confident enough to do it. But since, I've been here for a long time now, for over 4.5 years, and I've had some great support from the men and the women in the business, and I do now feel in a position to do that. But it has taken some unlearning of habits
Yeah.
that I was taught at school. And when I did read your book during lockdown, which was 2 years ago now, again, it really resonated with me, and I use that toolkit to consider when I'm trying to just do something to get praise rather than necessarily
Mm,
doing what I think is right. And I think it's trying to be brave to challenge and make those conversations. But I'm fortunate where we work in a very open environment, and we
mhm.
are encouraged, as I said before, to challenge with care. But
Yeah.
I do think there will be, a lot of other women in other companies that don't have as much of that. So it's definitely something to touch on and consider. Do you have any new insight since becoming a mother? Because I know you talked a lot about the vision for your children is to grow up in a world that is equitable.
Yeah.
Um,
I could now talk for a really long time about, and I feel like it's all still very, in a way, very like soupy for me because I'm just living it. I'm living that transformation. And yes, when Playing Big came out, I wrote it while I was pregnant with my first child. I now have three, including
Congratulations.
one who was born who's just a baby. Um, just born last summer. So I'm
Oh,
very much in it. And I think I have a ton to say, but I was joking with some friends the other night. Like I was saying, I feel I should apologize. I should issue an apology because there definitely were some times when like people would say to me when I didn't have kids yet, like, okay, Tara, but I have all these caregiving responsibilities and like, can I really play big now? Maybe now is not the time. Like, is there a phase for everything? And I kind of was, no matter what the circumstances, I would kind of always just be like, you can absolutely do both. Just wake up half an hour earlier. It'll be fine. Now I'm like, that's so not what it's about. It has nothing to do with waking up half an hour earlier. There are so many different ways to be an incredible mother. No question. I think I have more respect and understanding that it's okay to also name that there are like different seasons of our life and we can choose which arena we want to play big in those different seasons. If we're really thinking about playing big as that loyalty to yourself, I feel that motherhood requires a lot of courage from me. Sometimes it's courage to question what the pediatrician is saying. Sometimes it's courage to question, how the school thinks I should do drop off with my kid. Sometimes it's courage to say no to, the culture that would have them playing, have them be on social media around the clock. Like it is also a discernment of values. And there's also those crossroads moments. Sometimes it's courage of like, ooh, I'm getting really triggered by something. I need to go do some deep inner work from my own childhood so I can show up differently for these kids. So, um, it's a different kind of playing big, but it is also, there's absolutely a lot of rich terrain of like, how do I want to show up here and lean into that fully? The same way, we don't want to follow someone else's script in our careers. We don't want to follow someone else's script in our mothering
I love that. Thank you so much,
or
Tara.
fathering. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tara, for joining us. And Beth as well for hosting this interview. I was smiling all the way through your chat, and I find it so useful. Tara, I think I also wanted to thank you personally because your book has really, really helped me in so many ways to kind of break some internal, inner barriers. So your work is so, so needed and so appreciated.
Oh, thank you. I'm just honored to hear that and so appreciative of you both sharing it. And thank you, Beth, for the conversation. It was a true pleasure.